Greg Edwards, thank you for doing this on behalf of the Jamestown Bar Association. Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
Well, it's a great story to tell if we had a long time, but my...
By the way, this is for your kids.
Yeah, well, it's if anyone had an idyllic childhood, I did. You know, my dad, born and raised in Panama, we teased him. He moved 5 times, maybe it was 6, but throughout his whole life, but was within a quarter mile of one another, the various homes and farm and such that he lived in. My mom, born and raised in Gassaway, West Virginia, and came up here to pursue a teaching opportunity with her sister. My mom was phys ed, her sister Betty was an art teacher, and there happened to be 2 openings in the Clymer School District. And so they came up here. My aunt was engaged, I guess we're just recently married. Her husband went to Germany as part of military service, so she spent a year in Clymer. And during that time, my father was introduced to my mother and vice versa, and you know, the rest is history. But so I had the chance to grow up in the tiny little town of Panama. Somebody told me, or our pastor told, part of his sermon this past week, said there's 1,000 people that live there. I think that's overstated by about a factor of 3, but tiny little place. And I got a chance to grow up there with a loving father and mother and 2 siblings, and just a great start to life. And it really was the literal foundation of anything good that I've achieved is right from there. I also had another unique benefit in that our family farm was adjacent to a really spectacular summer home that the Peterson family had, and I had a chance to get to know that family from a wee kid, a wee child, to today, which has been wonderful.
Well, it was many stories. But I also know your dad had a farm. Your grandfather had a farm.
He did.
Right, it was the contiguous farm there. And what drew him to Panama? Or was he likewise a Panama guy?
My grandfather,
Yeah.
in the general area of Clymer in Panama, that kind of bailiwick was where both my paternal grandparents were from, and so it's kind of stayed in the region, put it that way, not specifically Panama, but the Panama-Clymer region. That's where the vast majority of the family is from.
Do you know anything about the history of why they gravitated way back when to that area? Or?
No, other than it just was kind of a natural outgrowth of their families having typically, or most of them having farming backgrounds and being in that general Clymer, Panama area. I think my grandmother, her family was very close into the Clymer area, and so is my grandfather. So it was just natural that they would gravitate towards the Panama area and on a farm that was available. Right now, it was part of the Panama School property and adjacent to that, and then it grew then they moved from there to what we call our family farm down in the corner of the Button Valley Road, and so that's, you know, my earliest memories were of farming were down there with my grandmother and grandfather, and then my father's 3rd or 4th career literally bought the farm, and we moved down there, and my grandmother, who was the survivor of my grandfather, moved up to our home on Wesleyan Street. So there was kind of an exchange and a purchase combination. So kind of a neat story. But like I said, my father moved 5 times. It was all within about a quarter mile in the village of Panama.
But your father, I don't recall him being in the farming business.
Oh no, he started off in a great story in that he began his working career working for the town of Harmony, driving truck, and then with Bissell Lumber driving log truck, and then went to JBC and started off doing the books for I think the predecessor to Franz and Russell, because he always said he really started his professional career in the sewer, and but was doing the financial books for a company, and then he was recruited into the banking business by his long-term mentor friend Jerry Russell, and started as a teller and worked his way up through the ranks to be a VP of what went from Bank of Jamestown to Bankers Trust to Key Bank, and I was invited to move to the Jamestown, the big branch at the time, of Bankers Trust, but really enjoyed his role as being the VP in charge of the 5 branches kind of in the western part of the county of the Clymer branch and Sherman branch and Westfield branch and Ripley, and there's another one in there somewhere. But then was recruited out of that work by his friends who started the founders of the Peak and Peak Ski Resort, Babcock, and I apologize, I should remember his name. Anyway, the founders who he was lending money to from the bank. And when Merle Babcock died very young, they recruited my dad to join Peak and Peak. So he was secretary, treasurer, and innkeeper of the Peak and Peak for a number of years. And then left that role and bought the family dairy farm and the 7 policy insurance book of business my grandfather had started. And after that grew that 7 farm owner policies into a substantial book of business with the J. Edwards Insurance Agency that my sister now owns, who's grown it by a magnitude of 5 since then. And we don't know how it's going to play out, but her son, my nephew Bryce, is working there as well. So it's really a 4th generation business. So that's really neat.
How did your grandfather, Joe, get into the insurance game?
It's a little bit unclear, other than the fact that that was kind of at the beginnings of the Chautauqua Patrons business, and it was one step before that actually became an association. And I used to know the name of the insurance company that he wrote them under, but it was just friends of his who were farmers and needed insurance, and he became interested in that to that small degree, but that was the start. 7 policies.
Agent for a company.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So it's kind of neat, and it was literally run out of the farmhouse, and that's really where my father started running it. It was right out of the farmhouse, and then acquired an office building downtown in downtown Panama, and then it grew from there.
So when you're going to Panama school and graduate from Panama High School and ultimately to Allegheny College, was there pressures for you to kind of ultimately get educated and come back to the business?
No, in fact, my father was very encouraging of me to pursue a legal degree, and initially I really had no interest in it. He obviously worked a lot with lawyers from his banking days and then into the insurance days, and had great friendships with a number of attorneys around, and so he saw the value in that and encouraged me to do that. And after a brief stint in the sales world between Allegheny and the University of Toledo, I came to understand or believe that there was an opportunity there for me. So that's really kind of the genesis of that career, was really my father's encouragement. He professed that it would give me good training, obviously that would be effective kind of in a broader sphere, but also the opportunity, if I chose to work for myself. And while I never did that in the legal field, I always had worked for a firm or with partners. Truly, that's an opportunity in the legal world to be your own boss.
So your dad's blowing in your ear while you're at Allegheny College. Why don't you consider this? Yeah. Was there an aha moment at Allegheny that maybe some professor or something happened and said, all right, I think he's got something here?
No. In fact, when I was in my senior year, I had gravitated towards political science. That was my major, with a bit of a focus in economics, which I thought was going to be my degree when I went there. I gravitated toward the political science, candidly, because it came naturally to me as far as the methodology behind the study of political science, and that there was theory, but there was also an opportunity to kind of chart your own course and make your own arguments in that field, and had a bit of history in it, and all that sort of stuff kind of intrigued me. So my senior year, I'm doing my comp that you're very familiar with from your days at Allegheny. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, hey, what am I going to do for a job? And this very enjoyable time in Meadville, Pennsylvania is quickly coming to a close. And so I started very actively looking at opportunities, and law school never occurred to me at the time. I was out of funds and heavily leveraged in loans, despite great help from my family, and decided I wanted to go out and earn a living. And so I got a job in a sales position with a small steel company outside of Pittsburgh. They said they'd take me. I said, that sounds good, and worked down there for a little over a year and enjoyed that. And then came back and assisted my dad running the dairy farm for about a year. Quickly reminded of the challenges there and the 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and did two things. Applied to law school and interviewed with the Marine Corps. And as happenstance would have it, on the same day or two I was scheduled to go to Buffalo for my interview with the Marine Corps, the University of Toledo said they'd take me as a student. So that was obviously divinely inspired and timed appropriately, because 3 years later I graduated from the University of Toledo, and between that second and third year I had a chance to clerk with the Erickson, Webb & Skolton firm. And so I spent summer working for those three very fine lawyers who I'm very fond of.
How did that connect? That's
Bruce, and went to Panama United Methodist Church, Panama guy, obviously, quietly influential across a lot of sectors, but very well respected, as you know, from your work with him. And honestly, they said they'd take me as an intern, which is not a very easy thing in the Jamestown market, because at that time, as is true today, very small firms, and some of them were willing to take on that expense, because that's what interns are, as you know, and offer that boost to a potential member of the the legal community, and they agreed to do that, and I'm ever thankful that they did.
And at the time, just for the record, it was Phil Erickson.
Phil Skip Erickson, as you know, Skip, very established long-term lawyer. Paul Webb, probably one of the best litigators that we've had in this marketplace, very successful business guy in addition to being a lawyer, and Bruce Skolton, a lawyer's lawyer, and very, very smart and talented lawyer. And those three guys gave me a very unique look at the legal business, because they were three very different people, very different lawyers, all high moral, ethical standards, which is always a great start, but very different in personality and approach to the law. And so it gave me a chance to see that. They offered me, an opportunity when I graduated to come on board with them, as a, green as grass, fresh out of law school, virtually knowing nothing truly about being a lawyer. And that's kind of one of the failures of the law school, legal industry in our country, is that there is a complete disconnect between the study of law, the passing of the bar exam, and then the actual practice of the law. And I think that any number of people who were much more astute than I could identify that complete disconnect leads to a lessening of the capacity of lawyers, I think, honestly, throughout their whole career, because there is no training on the business of being a lawyer. There really is no training on the finances of being a lawyer. There is no experience that's given on running a business, with employees and with responsibilities and with tenancies, and as far as leasing property or buying property. And so I think that has led, as I'm sure you could recount, even here in our little bailiwick, to any number of people, and I believe for the vast majority, unintentionally stubbing their toe and starting off or ending their legal career way too early because of that. So I was very fortunate in that my first start was with a firm that was high quality and trained right.
What day when you came back and you passed the bar and you worked with them, right?
Yeah, right. 1987.
1987. And what did they have you do?
It was an interesting start, and I say this with great respect but great candor, that I came back, interviewed with them, I interviewed with another firm. I thought that ultimately there was going to be a little bit more long-term potential with the Erickson, Webb & Skolton office. I also knew them, obviously, from working in that organization, even for that short period of time. So I interviewed with them, and I distinctly recall them saying, yes, we have an opportunity here for you. And they said that we're glad to take you on. We'll pay you $14,000 a year. And that there was an opportunity if I billed significantly more than that for some additional revenue. But I remember saying, I appreciate that very much, but that doesn't cover my student loans and my car payment. And so they responded that you're free to get a second job if you want. And so I did a little bit of hard calculations and numbers and some thinking, took the job, and shortly thereafter was able to obtain a job as an assistant public defender. So that was technically 3/4 time public defender. And so it was Monday to Friday during the days with the firm, and then evenings, most evenings other than Friday night, out and about all across the southern Chautauqua County, handling public defender cases in the justice courts, and then on Mondays for motions, kind of a combination of what motions I might have in civil matters, and then also, and I had a small book of private criminal work as well, but then also the additional work on motion and calendar days on Mondays up in Mayville for the public defender's office. So it was a great additional income. It got me out there in court, defending and arguing and litigating, and gave me some great trial practice and trial experience, and also introduced me to a whole cadre of other lawyers as well through that experience. So I did that for about 5 years, and then was able to.
Who was the public defender then?
Combination, because for a period of time it was Richard Slater, then for a short period of time it was Kevin Laumer, and there was a point in time when that Republican and that Democrat kind of exchanged lead roles in the public defender's office, but then the other would revert to a subordinate role, which gave some stability to that office. But those were the two guys, and Richard was the lead public defender, the top public defender when I started with the office.
So during that 5-year period, were there certain cases that are that I might know, or the person listening to this might know, that you might have been second seat on, or helped those, anything, or a story or two?
Oh, there's all kinds of stories, and there's only one case that might have a bit of notoriety, and that was a case that resulted from, and now as I think about it, it may have been an assigned counsel, but it was as a result of being out there in the criminal justice world. And it was a gentleman who was operating a semi-tractor trailer, somehow got off of then Route 17, now I-86, ended up in the city of Jamestown, and ultimately back out in the town of Ellery, where he drove through a blockade that the sheriff's department has set up, and literally drove over, and beyond the Vince Geraci's sheriff's patrol car. Then Vince at the time was the investigator, and it was, so as a result it was full of all of his investigative equipment, and it was rendered completely demolished in the median. And then Sheriff's Deputy John Bentley Jr. Climbed on, and this is after it had basically terrorized the downtown area with all kinds of traffic violations. Smashed open the front window of the semi to get the driver out. Got the driver out and hauled him away. The part that made it notorious, or had some notoriety, was after all of the violations and all of the traipsing around, 2 two things were discovered. It was my first exposure to the word crack cocaine, but this driver had been using that substance from when he left California across the United States to ending up here in Jamestown. But he was clothed rather scantily in lingerie of the female variety, and hauled out of there. And that's what made it notorious, because it became a subject of Paul Harvey and the rest of the story.
Really?
Yeah, so that's really as far as notoriety. It wasn't because of the work of the lawyers, it was the fact that it had that salacious detail that ended up. But interestingly enough, the driver, albeit addicted to drugs and committing those sorts of crimes, was a very nice gentleman, very smart. As we were talking about bail and some calculations of time you might have to do, mathematics was obviously his strength, because he was way out in front of me on some of these calculations and trying to calculate how much he'd have to raise and how long he'd have to serve. But so that was really the one case that the rest were many stories of very interesting cases and some interesting litigation and opportunities to try cases in the town highway barns and judges' living rooms and those sorts of things, because that was the nature of justice court in many of these small towns. You've got long-serving justices that towns didn't have the revenue or didn't dedicate the revenue to create justice courts. It was just wherever they could find space. But it was truly an opportunity to hone your skills, and it really did assist me in certainly my career going forward from there, because it was probably 1,000 or more cases over the course of that 4 years, in addition to the ones I was doing with and for the firm and my own. So it was a fast forward start.
So during that time period, there's certainly district attorneys, assistant district attorneys you were dealing with all the time. Who were some of those?
Well, it's Paul Andrews was one that anyone who practiced criminal law in that time frame would quickly recognize, because just really they were all quality people, but Paul just had that capacity to do his job and do it very well, and it was never personal, and he would go to the mat on the cases that needed it. Be also recognized when he had a weaker hand, and understood the challenges that volume brought, and just a personable guy. And so I really enjoyed litigating with him. I spent a lot of time with, no surprise to you, Bill Duncanson, because similar age, started about the same time in the DA's office, and so as a result, we spent a lot of time together, back and forth. He paid me one of the highest compliments one time by saying, "Man, Craig, you make it awful hard to say no." And that really is the job of particularly a defense counsel, in that rarely are the facts or the law on your side. You have to blend together that arguments across a broad spectrum to try and reach a decision or a settlement that's going to be the best for your clients. So I did a lot of work with him. Neil Robinson, he was a senior. He and Paul both were senior DAs when I was with the office, so I had a number of interactions with him, particularly since he handled the town of Ellery, his hometown, for decades, and so regularly interacted with him. But those are probably the top three that I dealt with on a regular basis. I came in just after, as I recall, John Ward leaving the office. So Jim Subject was the DA for a significant amount of time that I was there.
Judge Adams, did your paths cross with his?
Oh yeah, Honorable Lee Town Adams, a unique character. And the stories are legion. Very smart. Always made sure he had his Phi Beta Kappa key hanging from his front of his shirt, in front of his tie, so you could see that was his MO. always had a dip of snuff in, even though most people wouldn't know that, but he did. If you were pre-trying a case in his chambers, it was, he could have been an actor, and maybe was in some degree when he was younger growing up, but there was theatrics in his courtroom, and he was the chief leader of that band, which made for interesting, but if you were in front of him as a litigant, frustrating in many cases. He also had a penchant for bringing up or letting new lawyers truly experience the challenges of litigating. And I can remember a case that Rick Adele and I were litigating. I was defending a gentleman accused of rape, and it was a jury trial. And it was my first jury trial in front of Leetown. And Rick Goodell was the assistant district attorney, and I did a lot of litigation with Rick as well. And so I can remember that very clearly, how he took special delight in making my life very difficult during that multi-day trial, because I don't think he had any reason to believe it, but he wanted to make sure that there was a clear understanding of who was the boss in the courtroom. And so he did with all of that. I found him to be a good judge, and despite but in addition to the theatrics and that penchant he had for making sure you realized who was the boss, the humorous part was that you'd go into his chambers, and I'm sure you were there multiple times, but it was not unusual to find Leetown stretched out on his couch, shoes off, feet crossed, leaning back, holding court to whomever might happen to be there, whether it's staff or lawyers. And as you know, lawyers had the responsibility of sitting and listening, and so it was kind of interesting. I mean, certainly a more unique judge than many that have served in that role, I'm sure.
Did you find yourself also in family court? Would have been Hartley at that time?
Yeah, Judge Hartley, sure. And that was really, for a new lawyer in this region, in a firm like Erickson Women's Golden, you were going to get a lot of experience across the board. But I did develop a significant, called a book of business, or a significant number of appearances in family court, and Judge Hartley was the judge, and then followed by Judge Clare, and so those were the two judges in family court that I appeared in front of. And I was a law guardian, and I was certified to appear and represent those with disabilities as well. And so that, in addition to the private clients that I had that were in family court, that was probably the court I spent the most time in as pure volume, because that also was the outgrowth of any divorce case I had that would then very typically have a component of family court that would hang the additional work after the divorce was completed. So Judge Hartley ran a very good, very stern family court, but very efficient. And as long as you understood the rules of the road in that court, you were in good shape. But that's a court where the volume provides a real challenge for judges. I mean, it just really, and only having one, for most of my, or all of my career leading up until just recently, they've only had one family court judge. I think it was that, and in addition to the primary reason I got out of, or was inclined to get out of the legal business, the trauma. Because you think about it, in the civil world, you're adults. Yeah. You got into this or got dragged into this as an adult, or even in the divorce world, you're an adult. You're 18 or more when you got married, and you can, so it's different. But I can recall telling my lovely wife, Carrie, a number of times that that's the last custody case I'm going to do, or that's the last visitation case I'm going to do, or the last divorce case with kids I'm going to do, because that was the emotional part that really ground you down as a lawyer, because these kids didn't ask for this. but they're there, and then you have to find a way to work them through that. So I think from never being a judge, but seeing those family court judges, I think the volume and then the emotional trauma would have been very difficult to manage as the judge, as I experienced as a litigator.
You weren't always at Erickson Webb in school.
No, I had the good fortune of having my first law office with Erickson Webb and Skolton on the second floor of the Furniture Mart building, and directly above, one floor above, was the law firm of Ledestro, Lamancuso. And then a couple years later, it became Ledestro, Lamancuso, Cass, and Vanstrom. And I had a natural connection there because Lucian was from Faulkner. His son Larry grew up in Faulkner, went on to Allegheny, where I was, same age, same class. He played football the first year. I played football the 4 years I was there. So we kind of got to know each other kind of that first 2 weeks of the season with that hometown kind of connection. We played opposite side of the field. He was a tight end. I was on the defense side and typically would end up opposing him. So we got to know each other a little bit there. Then we both ended up in the same fraternity. And so I kind of had that natural connection.
For the record, Phi Delta Theta, in case you're curious.
Yeah, and we all claim to be followers and protege of Greg Peterson from his years as a Phi Delta Theta fraternity member from Allegheny College. And so I had that kind of initial connection. And then Steve Cass was a Phi Delta Theta fraternity member as well. I was a senior, he was a sophomore, so we had a connection there. And so through those kind of natural connections, and then also being in the environment, and being out there in the environment, I got to know Red, John Lamancuso, because he was a litigator as well. And I think it was in my 5th year of practice, and I'm sure it was at Steve Cass's nudging, Lucian Destro asked me to come visit him in his office. And those that know Lucian, that was unique and welcomed invitation because he was an enigma. And so he invited me up. And so I sat down in his office, and anyone who knows Lucian can appreciate this. And he's very direct. He said, "So, you happy down there?" Referring to Erickson. I said, "Yeah, I'm happy enough. I enjoy my work down there. You making any money?" I said, "Well, I'm making some money." I said, but in each answer, kind of suspecting what this was, I added the provision that I could be happier and I could be making more. And the nice thing about it, that was a prelude to him offering me an opportunity to come join his firm. And it was in no way a comment or a reflection of the other firm. Just there's much more opportunity here. All three now deceased, but Phil and Skip and Bruce, they were a partnership that shared overhead. This partnership was designed in a different way, and there was more opportunity across the board there. And a little bit longer trajectory, I thought, as far as future goes. And some unique characters that added to the pleasure of doing that work with them. And so I took that job, and I enjoyed literally every moment of it, even though lawyering is not easy. But the uniqueness of the people there continued, as in the prior firm, dedication to do the job right and do it intentionally and quality and with morals and respect for the clients. Really gave me a really nice run with that firm, with a lot of fun built into it. The practice of law in its very nature is not fun. I mean, it's great work and it's satisfying work, but it's a grind. And because number one, people don't want to come to see you. Rarely. I mean, maybe in an estate plan, they might have some interest in being in there. But lawyering is a luxury item. Luxury in the sense that nobody's going to go there unless they have the wherewithal to do it or have to do it. And they're not looking forward to the experience typically. So you have to find your satisfaction in doing the job and doing it well. and they were able to blend in that some fun too, and there's in the work and the personalities associated with it. So I'm very, very happy I was there.
Were you involved at all? I know John Lamacuso, Judge Lamacuso,
Yeah.
has a story about the one dealing with the Senecas, and were you part of that at all when they somehow he got
invited, and so did Steve Cass, into becoming members of the Seneca Nation. Both of them are members in that title as part of the clan or the house, and that work really, I'm not sure it got its genesis, but certainly got a lot of its push from their representation of Senecas who were charged with the criminal transport of untaxed cigarettes. And then they also, Steve in particular, did proceedings in front of the tribal council down there. And very obviously a unique experience that was something that they can speak very directly about. But just being part of their firm when they were doing that, the stories were very interesting, and kind of one of those rare opportunities that being a judge in a bailiwick like the greater Jamestown, Chautauqua County, Cattaraugus County region really was. And my exposure was really to the three counties of Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Erie County as well, and the various courts that I practiced in. Each of them, as you know, are completely different, really driven by the nature of the judges and the nature of the lawyers that practice in it. And like anything, not that geographically distant, but very different in the nature of the proceedings in those three different courts, with a very urban feel to the Erie County, the middle ground of Chautauqua County, and the very rural and unique practice that Cattaraugus County was, and I presume still is. But having the Senecas mix into the Cattaraugus County was a really unique thing that I experienced kind of secondhand through Judge Lamacuso and Steve.
Within that firm of the names you've mentioned, Judge John Lamacuso, Stephen Cass, even yourself, the practice of law, the private practice of law, kind of turned curve, did a 180 when all of a sudden the public sector became part of the conversation. Curious.
Sure.
I'm not sure of the timing of this, but there was I assume within the firm an aha moment when Judge Lamacuso decides, maybe I'm going to want to run for city court judge. Was that first?
Yes, yeah, that was first. And John had a significant practice. And volume, as far as commitment-wise, probably his personal injury cases by way of complexity were the most challenging. He also represented the CSEA, so he had a lot of union work that he did. In addition to a whole variety of other things, he had high-profile criminal cases because he was a high-profile guy, is a high-profile guy. He's really had to, take a back seat. That has had to take a back seat since he's a judge. But if you were to ask him about high-profile cases, he could have a litany of them in the criminal world, and well worth the conversation at the right time.
The right time.
But the upside was Lucian had a voluminous practice. Oh my goodness, he had a list of clients that was gargantuan for all the right reasons. Had to practice for a long time, well known, well established, whether it's real estate or anything else. He had a significant book of business. But we had three younger lawyers in there between Steve Cass, John Vanstrom, and myself. And between the three of us, we were able to absorb a lot of the cases that John had and maintained an appropriate amount of those after he left. Other firms picked him up. For a short window of time, I handled his CSEA book of business. So that was just a unique moment in time in my career, very different from what I had been accustomed to before. Chuck D'Angelo picked that book of business up very, very naturally after that kind of contractual relationship that John had with them expired, and he picked that business up. But the three of us were able to pick up much of his work and kind of incorporate it.
Was it clear that he was going to become a judge at some point, and that he was going to run for judge?
No. This was something he was recruited to, as I best recall, by the Democrat Party to step into that void when Judge Alessi retired. Another unique character in the business, as we both appeared in front of him. But when he left the bench, I'm sure there were others that were approached about that. It was not an easy decision for John. I'll let him describe why that was, but by his very nature, he's gregarious. He loved being a litigator. He really enjoyed the high-profile personal injury cases where he'd really be in the mix. But he's a very smart business guy too, and he clearly recognized that that city court judge was an opportunity for him to pursue that opportunity on the bench. He's also a very good business guy, and it allowed him to pursue his business interests as well. So I believe he was recruited and one of the folks that threw their hat in the ring, and then clearly was a good choice and has been a great city court judge.
Remember conversations with Lucian as to whether he encouraged it or discouraged it?
No, Lucian did not encourage that in any way, shape, or form. Did not believe that would ultimately be the best choice for John. But I think he also understood why it was attractive to John to be a city court judge. And as I said, I think ultimately even Lucian would recognize that it was a good move for John.
Well, then similarly, and I'm again not sure the timing, but was Steve next?
Steve was next, and that was a more challenging transition. One, because he was a very good friend and compadre, similar business, and we worked cases together. And so that was harder, but it was absolutely the right approach for Steve, and one that anyone could see that telegraphed from the moment he became a lawyer, that was ultimately going to be an opportunity for him to make that leap. It was fun working his campaign to help to whatever degree I could to assist him in that, and landslide victory was nothing's guaranteed, but his opportunity to be appointed to the job by by Governor Pataki for a period of time, and then to run as the sitting surrogate court, and then just his personality and his work effort that he puts into everything. If you were going to wager on a race, any of them in the last 25 years, you'd wager on that one. And so, but his caseload, his clientele, his number of active cases he had at the time was gargantuan, and rightfully so. Great lawyer and boundless energy. So it really then fell upon John Vanstrom and myself to pick up his cases. And John, very, very talented lawyer, very, very smart. But his practice didn't necessarily align with a lot of Steve's work, because John's practice was gravitating correctly towards the real estate and estate work and that sort of thing. And so Steve had a good share of that. But we had to absorb that civil and criminal litigation calendar. And so we did our level best to divide those up and manage those. And we did. And
did you bring anybody in at that time? Did you remember any additional attorneys?
No.
Okay, just so that they went from 5 to 4 to 3.
Right.
Okay.
And so that was a very active time.
Wow.
And but we got through that, and like I said, I think all three of us were thrilled that Steve was able to make that move, and here we are. A couple decades later, as hard as that is to imagine, and Steve has done a tremendous job, and no one has been surprised by the fact that he's become the go-to judge in Chautauqua County for sure, and acting Supreme Court, surrogates court, and the domestic violence judge, and I think there's 2 or 3 other specialty courts that he's doing right now. So I'm very, very proud of him.
Politics didn't avoid you either.
No, and that was a much different story. That was totally out of left field, to use a baseball analogy that fits very well with you. I really had no involvement in politics, and other than helping Steve on his campaign, and then after that helping on the Nancy Naple congressional race. And so it was really the result of, and I can't even remember now, Bill Daly could tell you, I can't remember specifically how he and I became identified as somebody that might be able to host some events or a particular event for Nancy Naples down here, but that might have even been preceded by a fundraiser for Congressman Quinn. In fact, I think that's probably how it started. Congressman Quinn was, we had an event down here for him, and then that was followed by one for Nancy Naples that she believed.
I think it might have been the one at the Jackson Center.
Yes, it was. In fact, it was at the Jackson Center, and there's funny stories from that, but the reality was that was nothing other than the two of us being recognizing that Congressman Quinn was doing a good job, and being asked to try and host one of those to kind of bring a group of people together. It turned out to be very, very successful financially, and for bringing some unique folks to the table. And you can understand that, as in any enterprise, there's kind of your common suspects that kind of gravitate towards interest in that, and there was that. But then we kind of brought a little different view or background to it, and maybe just some naive boldness that, well, why wouldn't you want to come to an event at the Jackson Center for Congressman Quinn? And so we got a really interesting group of people there, and it turned out to be financially very successful for the congressman. And then when Nancy Naples followed in trying to win that seat, her team asked us to participate and be their kind of Chautauqua County leaders in that area of the campaign. So we did. And I think from that, I was identified as someone who might have interest in, although I didn't look at it that way at the time. But I guess if you were a person to look at it from many steps removed and see that I had a political science major from Allegheny, and that I had been involved in a couple of successful events here in Chautauqua County, that I might be interested in that. And that's kind of was probably the genesis to being asked by the then county chairman for the Republican Party, and solicited to consider running for the county executive seat that was coming up against a 2-termer in Mark Thomas.
I think it surprised many, including myself, that when not your involvement generally, but leaving the practice. Is that hard for you?
I think it was divinely inspired, my faith background, because it came at a time when I had a very active practice, and I can't judge it against others. I can only judge it against what experiences I've had. And it was a very active practice. And a good share of that, because of the nature of the firm I was with at the time, Pheasant and Lawmer and D'Angelo, a much larger firm, numbers-wise, than what I had previously been experienced at. And because of the size of the firm, the business of lawyering lended itself towards being a more specific in the nature of cases that you were going to carve out. And each of the lawyers there were also very successful in their primary fields. So I brought some experience on the civil litigation, particularly in the family law of divorce, primarily experience at the time, and the criminal law. So in that larger firm, that's kind of where my practice evolved, and I will suspect that happily a number of the lawyers who had some practice in those areas said, yes, we're willing to take you on in our firm. Lucian Lestro and I merged our practices into Pheasant and Lawmer D'Angelo, and I was thrilled with that, because I knew if Lucian...
Just for my purposes, John advanced from then went with Spoto and Slater?
Yes.
Is that what happened?
Yes, and for me, I was thrilled with that because John's practice worked very well there in the sense he was bringing a not singularly, but a focused real estate practice. And of course, Doug Spoto had a huge real estate book of business there. So that worked out very well. And I was thrilled that Lucian could bring his practice to Pheasant Lumber and D'Angelo because of the affection, in particular, Chuck had for Lucian as a mentor. And the ability for that larger firm to allow Lucian to do what he wouldn't necessarily maybe broadly acknowledge, but he's looking to wind down. And the ability to be an active lawyer in the areas that he wanted to be and to be able to bring in business and then hand it off to quality lawyers, which he did for us in the smaller firm, but he could then do with flair and with even more volume with a firm of that size. So that allowed him to do that there and allowed me to land as well with a quality firm and an opportunity to do that. But by the very nature of its design, the significant amount of my practice was in the criminal and matrimonial world. And the matrimonial world in particular, it's a very challenging practice to do day in and day out. As evidenced by today's marketplace, there's very few lawyers here in Jamestown that are even in the business. And as I alluded to earlier, there were periods of time that I'd come home and tell Carrie, my wife, I'm not doing any more custody. Well, you can't do divorce without doing custody. And so I think all that was brought together, and then a moment in time, 18 years in to a practice, give or take, the opportunity to consider a different career. And it was a big leap. I mean, number one, you're obviously no guarantees you're going to win. Number two, my thanks to the principals at Pheasant Lumber D'Angelo allowed me to run for office while continuing to practice with the obvious reality that production was going to drop off and the load was going to get shifted a little bit. But again, my thanks to them quality people there, they were willing to do that with me and for me. So I ran and I was able to win. And so that then had me handing off my cases and my practice. Again, fortunately, because it was a larger firm, there were folks in there that certainly had the capacity, both professionally and practice-wise, to absorb what they wanted to and hand off to other lawyers outside the firm the work that they didn't want to take on. So it was a good fortune to have the series of relationships that I had between those three firms.
So the county, you became county executive, Chautauqua County, and was it hard to go, now all of a sudden you are an administrator of the largest business really in Chautauqua County. It's a huge operation. And when you're lawyers, you kind of focus in on being micromanaging your case. Micromanaging, that's a mindset to becoming a macro manager. Was that tough?
No, different for sure. But like with any team, a leader has to be smart enough. I use the word very generally smart. I mean, you just have to be, have the base intelligence to recognize that you need to surround yourself with really talented people if you want to be successful. That's true in the law. You got to have quality people around you, because even if you're the only lawyer in the office, you then had to have staff, you had to have associations that were going to come alongside you, and whether that's on the finance side or on the production side, you had to be smart and have some interaction with staff. But it was a huge leap to go from you have an insular practice with a very few people to 1,500 employees, hundreds of millions of dollars, and all of the associations that go there. But government has evolved to the point where it's certainly impacted by leadership, but the design and the bureaucratic nature of it, regardless of that turn at the top in this case, the machinery remains. How it's operated, what its focus is, what its end goal is, changes based on who's in that chair. But ultimately, it's to serve the people that put you there, serve the people that pay the taxes to allow the positions to be there. And so, steep learning curve, tremendously steep learning curve. But I had the distinct advantage of having quality people in some of those seats and then bringing other quality people to be the people I trusted to really do the job, to accept the focus that I brought to the work, to really identify that while in many cases my job was to lead, which it truly was in that job, but then to design goals and design, I'll call it guide rails, for the folks that I had empowered to do their significant work independently with those goals in mind, kind of establishing those guide rails. They very quickly understood how I thought and what I believed was the right approach, driven by ethics, driven by delivering for the people that put us there, clear understanding what the role of government was, but ultimately also a fiscally conservative but socially moderate approach, recognizing that the world is full of people and not everyone comes at it the same way, obviously. But very quickly I was able to kind of identify who existed in those leadership roles when I arrived, and those that could be added to and modified as typical with new leadership. I had the very good fortune of having the opportunity to surround myself with really, really talented, smart, ethical, dedicated people. And that made my 8 years there so much easier, despite the fact that it's not a job for the faint of heart. And it gave me a window into a much different vastness of our state, because the county is associated directly with, Albany and the state, and other county executives or chairs of legislature who are leading those counties, and there's many from much different areas of the state. But I have always found Chautauqua County to be unique, a microcosm of a lot of different entities, from the one percenters of the one percenters to those who have nothing, and the challenges both those and opportunities both those present, along with a good mix of minorities, from the Amish community to the migrant worker communities, and the rural, obviously significantly rural community with a little bit of urban environment in it, and then national border on our north, two of Pennsylvania on two of our borders. So it really kind of gave me a real unique look at governing in this far west region of the state.
You did not complete your second term. You had other things that intervened, didn't you?
Well, yeah, it was. I had an opportunity to be asked to run for lieutenant governor. And so I...
Tell me a little bit of that. What was the circumstances of that? I mean, I think that took us by surprise, too. I mean, you've been a surprise guy.
Well, it wasn't scripted in any way. It was a situation where I was recruited to throw my hat in the ring to be the lieutenant governor, a potential lieutenant governor candidate for Rick Lazio. Mm-hmm. And so that was not something that I expected or anticipated. Looking back, I can kind of see how it evolved, in that I knew Rick from a tour. He came through Western New York when he was running against Hillary Clinton. So we had a couple meetings, interactions, and I, to this day, don't know exactly how I ended up on his short list for a lieutenant governor opportunity there. But at one point in time, when I was county executive, he asked me if I'd stand in for him. And the interesting story there was I was working in Mayville in my office, and one of his team on his campaign called me. And I'm not sure I had met Kevin. I apologize, just blanked on his last name, but a very talented lawyer, said, hey, Greg, you and I've met, and Rick would like you to consider standing in for him in an event where he's got a conflict, he just can't be there. And I said, hey, I like Rick, and I'm thrilled he's running for Congress, he's actually running for the role of governor at that stage of the game to get the nomination. And I'd known him from that run for Congress. I said, anything I can do to help, I'm glad to do it. Oh, that would be great. I said, when is it? He goes, tonight. And I said, oh, really? I said, well, I did a quick look at the calendar. I said, okay. I said, where is it? He goes, Clinton County.
Oh my God.
And I said, Clinton County. So, Carm Catney's been my right-hand partner for 20 plus years, at the time, 20, from my days at Tierksville and Skolton. But I buzzed Carm. I said, Carm, how long does it take to get Clinton County? So she's doing the research, and I'm talking about it. It was a Clinton County Republican event. And he said, so yeah, and he said, it's really going to be an easy lift for you, Greg. We'll give you, and I had kind of followed just very generally along with Rick's campaign, and knew he's a quality guy, and didn't expect that the position would be, the talking points would be that hard to, understand and deliver. He says it's going to be no problem at all because it's just Clinton County folks. There's not going to be any other potential candidates for the Republican nomination. And so Carmen goes, 8 hours. So she whispers that to me. I'm thinking to myself, 8 hours to get to Clinton County from Chautauqua County. But then by then I'd already kind of committed. And so I said, all right, Kevin. I said, yeah. I said, call me on the drive because it's 8 hours and I got to leave right now if I'm going to do it. And fortunately for me at that moment in time, a very unusual scenario where I had office meetings as county executive, but nothing that required my attendance. So I drove the 8 hours to Clinton County. On the way, Kevin called to tell me, he said, Steve Levy's going to be there. Now, Steve was Rick's biggest challenger to that role. I knew Steve because he also was a county executive, and so we'd interacted a lot. So this puts me in an unfortunate position where now I would be necessarily presenting in opposition to my friend Steve, who at the time was also a county executive, in the very challenging position where this isn't my race, this isn't my, factual background as far as what Rick was really trying to promote. So I did what I could on the drive. Honestly, it was my first trip in a direct way from Chautauqua County to Clinton County, and it gave me an immediate appreciation for the breadth of the state and the difference of the state. But then when I landed in Clinton County, it was very much like Chautauqua County, and then it had this mix of urban and rural and agriculture and a border and all those sorts of things. But I arrived out there and survived the event, put up a decent showing for Rick, even though obviously Steve ate my lunch, I'm sure, when it came to its capacity to really deliver on message. But after that point in time, sometime later, Rick reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in coming and talking to him, about running with him as lieutenant governor. And so I went out to New York City and met with he and his team. Peggy Noonan was one of the people who interviewed me. There was also another gentleman whose name I should recall, but that was quite some time ago now, who was also nationally recognized in politics, that really was there. They were the two core leaders at that early stage of Rick's campaign. And so they interviewed me, and I must have passed muster there, although they then indicated that the next step would be a background review. They very clearly, and for all the right reasons, stated, Greg, we're using the exact same format that they just used for the gentleman who's seeking to be George W. Bush's vice president. So it's going to be the same people, same process, doing your background search. And they did that, obviously, as you can appreciate, so that if there's any trepidation on my part, I would immediately say, well, let me think about it. I'm not so sure I want to do it. But I was bold enough, I guess, to say, okay. And I must have passed whatever analysis that actually became or resulted from that. And so I ended up on the ticket with Rick Lazio.
What'd Carrie say?
She's such a great partner. I think it was because of those conversations we had, about the emotional toll. Also, I appreciate as being a lawyer, there's not only the emotional toll, there's just the hourly toll. Because there is no money tree. You just plug in and turn on when you're a lawyer. You're only making money if you're working on a case for a client that's willing to pay you for that work. And so the combination of those, time and emotional, physical toll, and you're 18 years in, and so you reach a time. Not everybody can make it a true career. So I think all of those factors played into it, and I think probably better than me, she realized that if it didn't work, there'd be other opportunities out there, and so it came at the right time. Again, I'm sure it was divinely inspired that opportunity presented itself. So I dove in.
So it's the primary. You got primaried. There was a primary. Lazio against Carl Palladino, and I forget who you were against.
A gentleman from who was a councilman in New York City,
Okay.
Who I didn't know anything about, other than I just knew him, that he was Carl Palladino's designated running mate, rightfully so. Carl's from Western New York, and this gentleman had the exposure in New York City, which is the key component in New York State, and so it was a contested primary, and so I worked as county executive Monday through Thursday night. I took advantage of my vacation time and campaigned Friday through Sunday, 26,000 miles in a matter of about 4.5 months of travel around New York State. Had the distinct pleasure of getting to know the state much better and meeting people and being constantly amazed at the breadth of the state, the differences of the state, the opportunities this Empire State offers and how it's been squandered, in my opinion, and frustrated by that. But ultimately, I was able to carry the day not only with the Republican Party, and I won the primary against my opponent from New York City, which is, when you think about that, that's pretty unique. I was reminded, I'd forgotten all about it, but somebody reminded me the other day that I actually got more number-wise votes than Carl did on the ballot, and that wasn't necessarily my capacity, but Carl could be a divisive person, even though very capable person. And at the end of that, and also I was able to become the candidate for the Conservative Party, a completely foreign involvement for me. And I can remember the passion of the Conservative Party, and it was degrees higher than the Republican Party, just because you have to be if you're going to have that specific focus that the vast majority of conservatives bring to the table. And I can remember interviewing with them, and I can remember stating my case in opposition to the person that I think most thought would most likely get the vote. And if it was just a conservative decision, he likely would have. But since you really need those two together to have a viable shot, I think that's what gave me the edge. And I can remember our presentation to the conference, Conservative Party conference, and that he was, very talented, did a great job, and I got up and did my thing. But it was so passionate. I was so thrilled to win. I got a lot of this is naivete. I was just doing what I could do.
Right.
But at the end of it, I was so impressed by it. I literally walked up and shook the guy's hand and complimented him on his presentation. And as I recall, in my minimal acceptance speech, my reference that I was impressed with their passion, and that I stated that that's really what the Republican Party needed to bring to the table if we were going to be successful in this race. And then I leaned on another legal association and friendship, and that was Henry Witasick, who studied for the bar exam with me from the University of Buffalo. Gregarious, handsome, athletic, and at the time already well insulated into the Niagara County politics, and through that Erie County politics, successful lawyer in the Buffalo area. And I'd gotten to know him, friendship then, and then through interactions over the course of 18 years, then I was put in this position of not knowing Carl Palladino, not knowing Erie County politics, and calling up my friend Henry and saying, "Henry, man, can you help me here?" And he agreed to help me walk through this very unique scenario where I was the lieutenant governor candidate, and Carl was the successful Republican conservative as well candidate. And through his tutelage and his mentorship at that critical moment, Henry really led me through this process. Queued up an appropriate meeting between me and Carl Palladino at the Adams Mark hotel restaurant there in Erie County with an appropriate understanding of the legalities. I didn't know you could not run. I mean, you had to run with that association because you run on separate tickets, governor and lieutenant governor. And also recognizing that they were in a bind, Republican and conservative, because they couldn't just say, we want, for example, Greg Peterson to step into your role as our lieutenant governor candidate. And the only way to make that possible was either to accept a judgeship, which would then legally enable them to hand that endorsement off to somebody else, die, I didn't want to do that, or leave the state. Well, I didn't want to do that either. So I went into this conversation knowing that. It was floated that if I was interested in stepping out, there was probably a judicial post in New York City in one of the boroughs that was absolute throwaway because the membership down there is 90% Democrat and 10% Republican. So those positions, unless they're negotiated in advance, and some of them, are, that's getting into the weeds, but there's all kinds of judicial races down there that they just try and find somebody to step into to have a name on the ballot. So it was floated if I really wanted to step out, they could put me on one of those judicial races and I could step out and they'd put somebody else in. I didn't like the sound of that. That's ethically wasn't my thing, and I had a lot invested in the race. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to leave the state. So I went to the conversation with Carl, thanks to Henry, who queued it up, who was there, who he stepped off into the background with Carl's right-hand man.
First time you met him?
First time I met him, yeah. And it was, at a dining room table in the restaurant there. And we had a very interesting first conversation. Lawyer, Carl, by trade and longtime practice, business guy extraordinaire, significant real estate and business enterprise. So we had this conversation at this table, and I don't know how long it was. It was long, interesting. I'd love to have had a recording of it or had somebody there because I kind of live in the today. I'm certainly, as we all are, creatures of our history, but I don't dwell on that. And I don't have in fact, I have a distant recollection of a lot of what's happened, but I live more in what's happening currently with its impact on the future. So I didn't go to that in my mind saying, I got to remember this because this is a unique moment in time. I went to this, okay, this is what I need to make sure of. I need to get comfortable with A, B, C, and D. And so in my mind, I had this game plan I had to work through to get to the point where at the end of it, I could make this challenging, but appropriate decision on what to do next. So my focus was, who is this guy? And all these stories, during the campaign, what's fact, what's fiction, what's his belief system, what's he really want to do for the state, what would it mean potentially, as best I can tell, to continue on this race with him, and is there a methodology or a belief system or an approach that we can agree upon that will give me the comfort level I needed then on all of those bases that were important to me, Greg, that it would be the right race for the right reason with the right potential outcome. And so I got done with that and met with Henry. He said, so what's the deal? I said, what did you learn? Because he was talking to his lieutenant as well. And he said, well, Greg, it's there. It certainly is. You're the guy. If you want to go through that, here's what I know about them, their operations. This is the opportunities, the pitfalls, that sort of stuff. So I did what any smart husband would do, and particularly one who's got as great a partner as I did. Is I met with Gary and we talked about the opportunity. Ultimately, Carl's heart that he leads with on his sleeve is pure in the sense that he really is the underdog, the guy that's looking to help other underdogs, that's really still to this day committed to trying to move New York State forward in a way that's going to be most beneficial from his viewpoint. He's also very conservative in his philosophy, but he's also very outspoken. He's very emotional, but very, very smart. And after getting done talking to him about who he is, what he saw for the state, I agreed that his vision was the better vision for the state, given our opponent's background and vision and approach, and understood that platform, or that approach had to be advanced with the goal of winning, but recognizing that it was going to be an uphill battle. Just pure registration alone, there's 2-1 Democrat over Republican on any day, in any race statewide. And our opponent was a significant challenge. Andrew Cuomo came with everything that everyone knew as far as background and experience. And so I said yes. It didn't take me long to say yes, because I had done that, albeit short, interaction with Carl, and dove in. And that was a completely different campaign, a different approach, and but it also was similar to Rick's in that from my role with Rick, it was, Greg, you need to activate the non-city, the upstate event. You got to, activate that. Rick spent the majority of his time downstate, as Carl appropriated too, because that's win or lose.
Sure.
Can you activate enough people from the independents and conservatives and Democrat, kind of conservative side to bring them our way? And so it was. It's like any experience in life. If I could go back and do it again, I would have absorbed a lot more in a lot different way. But it's just coming at you as that proverbial trying to take a sip out of a fire hydrant. It's just coming so fast and so furious that next thing you know, we're election night and we're.
You were in New York City, right?
No, in fact, both. Yes, we were. That's exactly right. We were in a upper level of some fancy hotel. I can't remember what one it was at the time. Waiting for the results to come in, and before the polls even closed, they'd already called the race, and that was a discouragement and a tremendous failure of our election system nationally. I think that it cheapens the process, and we've seen the mistakes that can be caused by that. I'm a strong proponent of letting the electorate have their voice, and vote. But anyway, so that was fast and furious, right to a very quick ending. And I can recall driving home with my family, and it was just being numb because of the nature of that whirlwind, and stopping and having brunch with them on the way home, and just trying to absorb the fact that, holy cow, what just happened? And not in the sense of the negative so much as from 1,000 miles an hour to zero after that. And and then okay, shake the cobwebs off, and then back into the business of full time, virtually, because that's the nature of the business, 7 days a week with the county, and on from there.
Did you have of course your term is coming to an end.
It is.
It's coming to an end. What was your feelings about that?
I didn't realize it in that prior to that, or in that moment of time, but after really thinking and studying it and analyzing it, it galvanized my belief that a singular position in politics should not be a lifetime position. It shouldn't be a career. I mean, you can have a career in government service. You can have a career in elected services. But I do not believe now, absolutely, and it became clear to me at that time, that that's really what we were designed to be as a representative democracy, that is best for the person or best for the populace, because it's a very difficult job. It's too easy to become narrow, either minded or in scope. It's taxing mentally, physically, emotionally, and in that, the nature of that, it's not, in my opinion, best served for a long-term individual representation at any level. I know that better now, but I sensed it at the time. As I was studying politics, as I was in it, in that kind of fledgling role, I went from believing that the electorate can be the decision of how long a person will be in, and that the voters can decide the beginning and the end. But having been in the environment, I can tell you that that's not how it works. 90%, I think that's a rough guess, The vast majority are reelected if they want to be reelected because of the nature of being in the position, having the associations and in some cases, not in the county level, but the higher levels, the financial wherewithal to go in with such a high degree of leverage that's very difficult for a newcomer to come in and turn the tables on that, and at the state or national level, to really get that turnover that you need. Just by the nature of how the political party system and the dollars and cents status situation really works. So I had that kind of in my gut at that time. It's been refined since then. And I was curious what was out there. And so I went into that final year thinking, okay, I have a decision to make. There's lots of pressure early in the year to make that decision and disclose it. I did my level best to push that out because there was a lot of work that needed to take place in that last year of that second term. Advancing the sale of the Chautauqua County home was primary amongst that. Managing the significant financial challenges that we were in because of that Great Recession and coming out of that, coupled with the reduction by our then assemblyman of our sales tax rate intentionally, that stripped millions of dollars from our revenue, along with all those challenges. So there was a lot of really hard work that needed to take place, and I knew that decision needed to be made, but I intentionally held off that decision because my focus had to be on the work, and also because I knew if the decision, either way the decision went, I would either be a person campaigning for the position or a lame duck. So I delayed that as long as practical, and did a lot of analysis. What's the job market like? What's the potential for someone with my background out there? What would be a potential next step? And I had the good fortune of meeting a gentleman who had a mixture of profession in helping people obtain careers or jobs, and then also some personal understanding of politics. It was certainly a unique time, but as a husband, your father of three, you don't make these decisions lightly. But I was convinced that it was, 2 terms was enough. I don't know. People have affirmed for me that I could have won a 3rd term, but going back to that belief, that's not where you should make your career. I picked my head up, but really didn't know where to turn. Fortunately, through politics, I had met Mark Sandella. He was born in Fredonia, but was living in New York City, and had an interest in Congress, a congressional position. So he kind of made the tour through the district, kind of talking with people. And so we met. Very engaging, very bright guy. And I learned that he was a CEO of something called theladders.com, which was the company identified as being specifically designed for upper level pay jobs. And I forget now what the pay level was, but he obviously had a great deal of experience and knowledge with regard to hiring. Had written books, on getting jobs. So I leaned on that introduction, and I called him up, and he agreed to meet me. And I had never experienced the Harvard Club in New York City. They said, "Hey, come on down to New York. We'll have lunch at the Harvard Club, and we'll talk." So we talked. I put together a little resume, a little perspective of work from my view. And he was ever so helpful identifying what potentials were out there. But his clear statement was, "Greg, you don't know what's out there until people know you're looking." Mm-hmm. So he said, "I know you're trying to decide when to announce, but for all the factors we've talked about, and candidly for your opportunities, announce. The opportunity will present itself. You have a skill set that people are going to potentially see as viable for them." And he'd given me some examples. And so I announced. And then, of course, all the things we knew would happen happened. People called me a lame duck, and those who were opposing some of the work that we were trying to get done in the county had ammunition. But ultimately, it was, for me, absolutely the right thing to do. I knew then, I know better now, that it was the right thing to do. And so I finished up my term. We did some great work. I must tell you that I'm looking forward to celebrating someone I met during my time as county executive, who also was a great mentor to me and played a significant role. When I ended up stepping down a couple months early, I stepped down in October. Steve Abdallah, mm-hmm. Fellow lawyer, probably if he's in the top 1% of anybody's list of quality people, quality lawyer. He's had more impact on Chautauqua County, I think, than any other person in the history of Chautauqua County, in that he's really led the county from his role as county attorney for 30 years. He's kept more county executives out of problems and helped quietly, assuredly led them in directions that have been good for them and good for the people consistently over 30 years. And thrilled that he's not, and at his time, at his point, has elected to retire. And so I met with Steve, talked to him about what that meant for me to announce, what that would likely mean if I stepped out early, because I had the good fortune of learning that the Gebbie Foundation had an opening as a CEO, and that they were in an active search for that position. Interviewed for that position late in the year, was able to be hired for that role and then asked by the Gebbie Foundation to leave. I delayed that long enough, as long as I could, to fit their desires, but also to keep the wheels turning the way they needed to, recognizing that Steve could step into that role and easily be better than any of us as county executive. Us, I mean the 7 that have been in that seat. So I stepped out in late October, and Steve finished up my term, and the rest is history. But an enjoyable second career for me, from the lawyering and into the elected official role, and then on into my third career in the not-for-profit foundation world.
And a very successful one at the Gebbie Foundation, and you won't permit me the time to get into it because a lot of it's works in progress.
No doubt. I've enjoyed every moment, and doing this good work of trying to promote economic development in the city of Jamestown and the region, doing it from the foundation world, doing it behind the scenes, doing it with really quality people. I've enjoyed every minute.
Well, I've enjoyed every minute of this.
Yeah.
Is there case lawyers may be watching this, kind of a lawyer who some of them may not have practiced with you, but is there a message for kind of the young lawyer in all of this, Greg, and looking back on your own career?
Well, I think that's true in any career. If you became a lawyer because of the money, you made the wrong decision. Not because there isn't a good earning capacity as a lawyer, but if that's the choice, you are going to find yourself all too often making compromised decisions and ultimately ending up like some who make totally wrong decisions with regard to that. It's my belief, if you come at it as a profession, underlying word professional, that can be engaging, challenging, interesting most days, different every day. And if at your core it's something you do because you have the capacity, and it's because you're uniquely positioned to help, whether it's your corporate client, your government client, your individual person, whether they be an adult, a child, a person who has limited physical or emotional capacity. If you can come at it with that mantra, with that focus, with that approach, it's going to be immensely rewarding. If you're looking for something that's easy, find another choice. But if you're willing to commit the energy and the time, associate with the right mentors, as I was blessed to have, it can be very rewarding.
Thank you. This is fantastic. Yeah. Thanks for all your time, Greg.
Yeah. It was interesting just kind of contemplating this conversation, and the bar association that's photo in front of me, a wide range of personalities, wide range of backgrounds. You couldn't pigeonhole anybody, I don't think, in saying, we knew from birth that person was going to be a lawyer, mm-hmm. or how they're going to approach it. But an opportunity to meet some really, really cool people.
Is there a question that you thought I should ask or would ask and I have not?
No, I was thinking back over the various attorneys that I had association with. Park Catchpole was a very unique person who I had very little understanding of his history, but he was winding up his career as a kind of counsel role there at Erickson Women's School. Enjoyable personality guy. It was clear looking back that he was marking time, that he was enjoying his work as a lawyer, but he just had found a place to kind of have that office and have a very limited client, hand the ball off with, confidence that the work was going to be cared for.
Well, let's say, usually I do this and I forgot. let's just throw this in front of you.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that pops out, a story, a vignette, a kind of a Greg Edwards moment?
Well, we could go on for the next week and a half about Art Bailey, but he was and is. I was just in his office the other day with a developer who walked away saying, wow, how old is he? I said, 87. And he said, and I relayed this to Art later, and Art assured me it was one of the highest compliments he could receive. He likened Art to an attorney, now no longer with us, from Buffalo by the last name of Tenney. Art immediately knew who it was. He immediately launched into how that lawyer was one of the top 3 in all of Western New York. But anybody who practiced with or had association with Art would recognize that he is a character. Dalton Burgett, a singular story about Dalton, and his stories are legion as well. Classic, primarily personal injury litigator, tremendous trial lawyer. I can remember walking into the then, and still is, Supreme Court courtroom, and Dalton was at a table there for, I think it was the defense counsel table, which, anyway, and boxes strewn all around him. And I've certainly disrupted his work, but said, hey, Dalton, what are you up to? And he was in the midst of a personal injury case involving what he believed was a defective bulb, as I recall specifically, but had to do with electrical. And classic plaintiff's move, they tried to bury him in paper. Shortly after asking that question and him telling me what the case was all about, and he said the best I could do were get these documents delivered here. The judge would only order them delivered to the courtroom, so I'm grinding through these papers. He found the literal smoking gun that showed that they knew the defect was there, that it had caused problems, and they had attempted to bury it. And of course, he settled it for a very lucrative sum. But that for me was an opportunity to kind of that earlier point. If you want to do it for the right reason, you're able to really devote the time. Nothing's easy. Personal injury work is hard. But he literally spent the time in banker boxes. It looked like we'd built a fort in that courtroom, and he'd found that one piece of paper that proved his case. Yeah. So I just like that story because it's that one that people hear about. Yeah. But I had a chance to just experience from that very distant moment in time. I had the distinct pleasure, obviously, of interacting with most all of these folks, and obviously many that you would recognize. But that was clear. And one thing about, I see Doug Spoto's picture here, and I just saw him the other day, not surprisingly, out in front of Lysandros, and looked in tremendous health, even though he too is getting up there in age. The unique relationship he and Lucian had, and the daily interaction they had at Lysandros over lunch. And Lucian would give me the business because I would say something about that. He says, yeah, you go off to the Y and do your lunch thing. My exercise is here debating with Doug Spoto every day over lunch. And if you've been in there, it was an active conversation back and forth. But just lots of really solid people. I think that Jamestown, Chautauqua County has been fortunate to have the people that have elected to go through the rigors of becoming a lawyer, and with rare exception, the quality they've delivered to the region because of it. So hats off to the Jamestown Bar.
And to you.
Thanks.
Because you certainly exemplify that. So thank you. Thanks, Greg.
My pleasure.